The CEO had been paralyzed for 30 years until a hardworking single dad driver changed their lives forever. The phone rang at 5:47 in the morning, and nobody on the other end had good news. Richard Cole already knew that before he answered. Good news did not arrive before 6. Good news knocked politely, waited until a man had his coffee, maybe his second coffee. Bad news had no manners. Bad news called at 5:47 and made the air in the room go thin. He picked up. His assistant, a young man named Owen, was speaking fast. The car service had double booked. The corporate vehicle was already at the airport picking up the board chairman, who had moved his flight without telling anyone. There was no backup car available. There was no time to find one through the usual channels. The flight to Denver left at 7:40, and the airport was 40 minutes away on a clear morning, which this was not, because it had been raining since midnight. Owen said he had already booked a rideshare. He said the name of the app like an apology. Richard said nothing for a moment. "The driver knows about the chair?" he said. Owen said yes. He had included a note. Richard hung up. He sat in the room that had been designed around his life. The lowered counters, the wide doorways, the bed with its specific height, everything arranged with precise, joyless efficiency. He had lived in this apartment for 19 years. He had stopped noticing it a long time ago, the way you stop noticing a scar. It was simply the shape of things. He began the process of getting ready, which took longer than most people imagined, and shorter than most people expected, because Richard had had 30 years to make it efficient. He did not think about the accident anymore. He did not think about the man he had been before it, the one who used to take the stairs 2 at a time, who had a wedding date circled on a calendar that no longer existed. That man was not useful. Richard had no patience for things that were not useful. He was downstairs by 6:15, which meant he was 5 minutes late, and 5 minutes late was the kind of thing that put a hard edge on his morning. The car was already there. It was a dark blue sedan, clean on the outside, which was more than he expected from a rideshare at this hour. The driver was standing beside it, not sitting inside, not looking at his phone, standing beside it, in the rain, without an umbrella, holding the door open. He was a broad man, somewhere in his late 30s, with a face that looked like it had been through things, but had chosen not to be defined by them. He had a rain jacket on, old, the kind that had been washed so many times the waterproofing was more memory than fact. He was already wet across the shoulders. "Mr. Cole," the man said, "I'm Marcus. Good morning." Richard did not say good morning back. He nodded once and wheeled toward the car door. What happened next was the thing Richard would think about later, though he would not admit to thinking about it. Most people, when they encountered the wheelchair, did one of two things. They either froze and went awkward, standing to the side with their hands slightly raised, like they were not sure whether to help or whether offering to help would cause offense, or they overcorrected, diving in with too much assistance, narrating what they were doing, making the whole thing a production. Both responses exhausted Richard in a way he had stopped naming. Marcus did neither. He moved to the trunk, pulled out the folded chair Richard had transferred from, laid it flat, adjusted the seat rail on the passenger side for clearance, all without a word, without a look, without the slightest hint that he was performing an act of kindness. He did it the way a mechanic checks oil. He did it like a man who had done it before, for someone he cared about, and had learned that care did not need an audience. Richard sat in the back seat. The door closed. Marcus got behind the wheel. "Route's loaded," Marcus said. "Traffic's moving okay on the bypass. We'll be there in time." Richard opened his laptop. He did not say thank you. He did not say anything. He pulled up the Denver presentation and began reading. The rain picked up. The wipers moved in a steady rhythm. The music, low, barely above silence, was jazz. Not the aggressive kind people put on to seem sophisticated, but something older and quieter, the kind that assumed you had things on your mind and did not try to interrupt them. They made it 20 minutes before Richard noticed. The car had slowed. Not stopped, slowed, in a way that was wrong. He looked up from his screen. They were on the expressway, in the middle lane, and the engine was making a sound it had not been making before, a rough, dragging sound. Marcus pulled to the shoulder without panic. Clean, steady. the car gliding to a stop with no drama. "Give me 5 minutes," Marcus said. He was already out of the car. Richard watched through the window. Marcus had the hood up. He was working in the rain. Jacket soaked through now. The light from his phone propped against the engine as he looked at whatever needed looking at. A truck went past in the next lane, close enough that the car shook from the pressure of it. Marcus did not flinch. He kept working. Richard checked the time. 6:51, 49 minutes to departure. The gate closed 20 minutes before. He did the math. He opened his phone and found the airline number. Marcus knocked on the window after 4 minutes. "Fuel line valve," he said when Richard lowered the window. "It's a loose connection. I've got it held for now. It'll get us there, but I'm going to push the speed." "Do it," Richard said. The car moved. Faster now. Marcus threading lanes with the quiet confidence of someone who knew roads the way other men know spreadsheets. He was on the phone with someone, his dispatcher maybe, speaking in short sentences, already rerouting around a backup Richard's map app had not even flagged yet. Richard was on the phone with the airline. The woman on the other end was patient and professional and sorry, but the flight began boarding in 11 minutes and could not hold. "I understand," Richard said. He ended the call. He looked at the back of Marcus's head and said, almost to himself, "We're going to miss it." "We won't," Marcus said. He said it the way someone says a thing they have already decided is true. Not a guess, not an attempt at comfort, a statement. They arrived at the terminal at 7:23. Richard had already sent Owen a message from the car. Owen had called ahead. The gate agent was waiting. Marcus had the wheelchair out before Richard had fully processed that the car had stopped. He had pulled directly to the accessible drop-off lane, which was closer by 40 feet. Those 40 feet mattered. Marcus seemed to have known they would. Richard wheeled himself through the sliding doors. He turned once, briefly, at the threshold. Marcus was standing by the car, jacket dripping, watching to make sure he got through. He raised one hand. Not a wave exactly, just a confirmation. Richard turned and kept moving. He made the flight by 4 minutes. He sat in his seat over the wing, laptop closed, staring at the runway as the plane backed from the gate. The Denver numbers he had been reviewing all morning were somewhere in his bag. He did not reach for them. He kept thinking about the seat rail, the way it had been adjusted without a word, the way a man who owed him nothing had stood in the rain and worked on an engine and told him they would not miss the flight as if it were simply a thing that was going to happen. He thought about the truck that had blown past close enough to shake the car, and how Marcus had not moved. He thought about what that kind of steadiness cost a person. When Owen called at 8 to check in, Richard answered and said, "Find out who that driver was and make sure he's available tomorrow morning." Owen said he already had the app open. 6:15, Richard said. Same time. He closed his eyes. Outside the window, the city fell away below. Denver was waiting. Numbers were waiting. A board presentation was waiting. 30 years of things that did not stop waiting simply because a man needed a moment were waiting. But for the first time in a long time, Richard Cole sat with something he could not name, and did not try to, watching the clouds close over the city beneath him. It was raining down there. He hoped the drive home was better for Marcus than the drive out had been. He did not know why he hoped that. He hoped it anyway. There was no reason for Richard Cole to request the same driver twice. He was not a sentimental man. Sentiment was a tax he had stopped paying somewhere around the age of 32, when he'd learned that the people who held on to it longest were also the people who got hurt most reliably. He had a system for the corporate car service, had been using the same company for 11 years, and the system worked. Yesterday had been an error. Errors were corrected, not repeated. And yet Owen had the number in his phone before Richard had finished the sentence. Marcus arrived the next morning at 6:14, 1 minute early. The rain had stopped but left everything wet and gray, the city looking like it had not quite decided to wake up yet. He was parked at the same spot, not idling, engine off, conserving fuel. Richard noticed that too, though he would not have said why it registered. "Morning," Marcus said, as Richard wheeled out through the lobby doors. The chair went in the trunk. The seat rail was adjusted. Same as before. No ceremony. They pulled into traffic. The jazz was there again, low, the same station, or one that felt like it. Richard had his laptop open before they hit the first light. He did not know why. 20 minutes in, he looked up. Marcus was driving with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the door. His eyes were on the road, not the mirror. He had not tried to make conversation. He had not filled the silence with the kind of chatter that Richard had spent 30 years subtly discouraging from assistants, colleagues, and people in general who confused talking with connecting. He was simply present, driving, awake in the specific way that people who do not sleep enough learn to be awake. Not alert exactly, but enduring. The body keeping the machine running while the mind holds something somewhere behind the eyes. Richard looked back at his screen. On the third morning, he learned that Marcus had a daughter. Not because Marcus told him, because a child called. The phone connected through the car speakers before Marcus could reach for it, and a voice filled the cab. Young, careful, the voice of a child who had learned to measure what she asked for, because she understood, somewhere below words, that asking cost something. Dad. Hey, Lilybug. Marcus's voice changed. Not softer exactly. Warmer. The way a room changes when someone opens a window. The therapy place called. They moved the appointment again. A pause. Short, controlled. Okay, Marcus said. What time did they move it to? 4. But you work at 4. I'll figure it out. Don't worry about it. Dad. Lily. Firm but without sharpness. I'll figure it out. Did you eat breakfast? She had. He exhaled. The smallest release of air. Almost nothing. I'll pick you up at 3:15, he said. We'll go early and wait. The call ended. Silence came back to the cab. Marcus did not acknowledge that it had happened. He drove. His eyes did not go to the mirror. In the back seat, Richard did not move for a moment. He looked out the window. The morning was beginning to gather light, buildings sliding past, the city doing what it always did, indifferent and continuous. His hand, resting on the armrest, went still. He thought about the voice. 4. But you work at 4, said with that particular resignation that children develop when they have had to become, earlier than they should, aware of what they were asking. He thought about what kind of man organized his entire life around an appointment he could not afford to miss, and a shift he could not afford to lose. He thought about the therapy. The word had slipped out with the ease of something often said in that car, between those two people. Not a new problem. An ongoing one. He said nothing. That evening he called his head of human resources, a careful woman named Diane who had worked for the company for 14 years and had learned, across those 14 years, exactly how Richard Cole asked for things he did not want to directly ask for. If someone with a dependent had a neurological condition, he said, something ongoing, something that required specialist care, what does our medical plan actually cover? Diane was quiet for a moment. In theory, she said, it covers 60% of specialist visits after the deductible. But the neurological exception list is long. If the condition falls under experimental treatment, or if the insurer classifies the specialist as out-of-network, coverage can drop to nothing practically overnight. And if someone is appealing a denial? That process takes time, months sometimes, and it requires documentation that most people don't know how to put together without a legal background. I see, Richard said. Is there something specific you need me to look into? Diane asked. No, he said, just thinking through some policy gaps. He hung up. He sat in his apartment, in the quiet, the city lights coming through the floor-length windows. He did not turn on the television. He did not open the laptop. He sat with the question he was not quite ready to ask himself directly. What exactly was he intending to do here, and why? He was not a charitable man. He had given to charities the way powerful men gave to charities, strategically, for visibility, with an eye on the tax implications. He had not done a single thing in 30 years out of simple feeling. Feeling was not a foundation. Feeling shifted. He had learned that when a woman he had intended to spend his life with had sat across from him in a hospital room and told him she was sorry, she just could not see a future in this. She was sorry. She hoped he understood. He had told her he understood. He had not understood. He had simply decided, From that point forward, that understanding people was a secondary concern. Results were primary. Everything else was noise. He was staring at the city and thinking about a child who had not eaten a full breakfast in a house that was probably full of medical letters, and he was trying to figure out why that fact had taken up residence in him the way it had. The answer came the way answers sometimes do, not as a thought but as a memory. A hospital corridor 30 years ago, his own, a man he did not know, a janitor maybe, or a volunteer, who had come into his room to replace the curtain on the window, and had looked at him, not at the bed, not at the chart, not at the chair that was going to be his life, but at him, the actual person, and said, simply and without fuss, "That's a hard road. I'm sorry you're on it." He had not even caught the man's name. He had thought about him more than he'd thought about his fiancée in the years that followed, not every day, but in the moments when things got heaviest, when the road felt most like exactly what the man had called it. He thought about those 2 sentences, the fact of them, the simplicity of a stranger who had taken 3 seconds to acknowledge that a thing was real. He had never done that for anyone. He was not sure he knew how. On the 5th morning, something shifted. It was nothing dramatic. Marcus picked him up at the usual time, the usual spot. But as they came to a stop at a long red light, Richard became aware that the silence between them had changed character. It was no longer the silence of 2 strangers being professionally polite. It had weight, texture, the kind that accumulates between people who have shared enough space to become familiar without ever having chosen to. Richard looked up from his laptop. "How old is she?" he said. Marcus glanced in the mirror. 9, he said. 10 in February. The condition. Has it been? 3 years, Marcus said. Diagnosed 3 years ago. It's not fast. Slow progression, which is the good version of it, I guess. And the treatment? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Not guarded. Tired. There's a specialist in the city. Dr. Fletcher. He's the one she needs. But he's out of network for our plan and the insurance company keeps sending back the same letter. He stopped. "I'm handling it," he said. "It's getting handled." He said it the way someone says a thing they have been telling themselves every morning for months. Richard looked at the window. The light changed. The car moved. "She sounded like a good kid," Richard said. Marcus smiled, small and real. "She's the best person I know," he said. "And I know that every parent says that. She actually is, though." Richard nodded once and looked back at his screen. He did not open any documents. The screen sat there, lit, with the Denver presentation still pulled up from 2 days ago, and Richard Cole sat behind it and thought about a child named Lily and a man who drove through the dark every morning holding on to the idea that he was handling it, that it was getting handled, telling that story to himself with a consistency that looked, from the outside, almost exactly like faith. He closed the laptop. He looked out the window. He thought about what handling it actually meant for a man like Marcus, and he thought about what it would take, and he thought about what it would cost, and he thought about whether he was the kind of person who could do something about it. He sat with that for a long time. The jazz played. The city moved past. Marcus drove. Neither of them said anything else for the rest of the ride. But something had been set in motion. Richard could feel it the way you feel weather coming, the air changing before a single cloud appears. Something had moved, very quietly, inside him, and he had a suspicion it was not going to stop. The board meeting ran 4 hours. Richard had been in difficult boardrooms before. He had been in rooms where men wore their ambition like cologne, where the argument under every argument was about whose name would be on the building someday. He knew those rooms the way a sailor knows particular weather, not by thinking about it but by the feel of it in the body, the specific weight of an air that wanted to cause damage. This one was different. This one had a target. 3 of the 7 board members wanted to restructure. They used the word streamline 17 times across the 4 hours. He counted, because counting gave him something to do with the rage that was building at the base of his throat, slow and pressurized, the way water finds a crack before it splits stone. They wanted to close 2 distribution centers in the southeast, which meant 430 people losing their jobs 3 weeks before the end of the 3rd quarter, which meant those people losing their health coverage at the same time, which meant And none of the three men used the word people once across 4 hours. They said, head count. They said, legacy overhead. They said, optimization pathway. But Richard heard what they meant. He had always been able to translate the specific language of men who had never felt the cold side of a decision. It meant that 430 lives would be reorganized around a number on a spreadsheet that three men in good suits had decided was more important than the lives. He said no. They pushed. He said no again, with more structure around it, with the legal arguments and the precedent, and the long-term brand damage of mass layoffs before earnings, and the counter numbers his own team had prepared. He was good at this. He had spent 3 decades making himself impossible to dismiss, learning how to be the most prepared person in any room he entered, partly because being in a wheelchair had taught him early that the world would look for reasons to look past him, and he had decided, at 32 years old, that he would make that as difficult as possible. The meeting ended without resolution, which meant it would continue, which meant the pressure would continue, which meant the next 2 weeks were going to be an endurance contest with a board that had the legal authority to overrule him if they consolidated enough votes. Owen had the car waiting. Richard came out of the building at 7:05, later than usual, the evening dark and cold, the kind of cold that made the city feel smaller than it was. He got into the back seat, and the door closed, and Marcus said good evening, and Richard said nothing. He opened his phone. There were 11 messages. He started reading them. The third one was from his general counsel, who had spoken to 2 of the 3 board members after the meeting. The summary was not good. Richard typed a response. He typed it again. He deleted it. He said, without meaning to say it out loud, "Take the river road." Marcus glanced in the mirror. The river road was longer. Marcus knew that. "Sure," he said, and changed lanes. 3 minutes passed. Richard was staring at his phone, but he was not reading anything on it. "You took the slow route," he said. His voice had an edge he had not entirely intended. "You said." "I said the river road. It adds 12 minutes. I have 11 messages I haven't answered, and a board situation that is going to cost me the next 2 weeks of my life. And you took the slow." "I heard you the first time," Marcus said. He said it evenly. Not back down, not aggressive, even. Richard stopped. Marcus pulled the car to the side of the road. Not dramatically. Smoothly. The way he did everything. The car settling against the curb as if it had been planning to stop there all along. He put it in park. The engine stayed running. He turned slightly in his seat. Not all the way around, but enough. His eyes in the rear view were steady. "I'll take you wherever you need to go," Marcus said. "Whatever road you need. You can be angry the whole drive. That's fine. But I don't drive when someone in the car is wound like that. It's not safe." Richard stared at him. Nobody spoke to him that way. Not his board. Not his lawyers. Not the assistants who had worked for him across 3 decades and had learned, all of them, to read the atmosphere and stay low when it was like this. Nobody pulled the car over and told him to wait. He wanted to say something sharp. He had several sharp things available. They had been sharpening themselves during the board meeting and had been looking for somewhere to land all evening. He did not say any of them. He looked at the window instead. The river was out there, past the railing, black and moving. He could see the lights of the far bank reflected in it, broken and shifting, nothing holding still. "She left 8 days after," he said. It came out before he decided to say it. He heard it in the air as if someone else had said it. And then it was out there, and he could not take it back, and for a moment, he was not sure he wanted to. Marcus did not say anything. "My fiancée," Richard said. 8 days after the accident, she came to the hospital, and she held my hand, and she told me she loved me, and she was sorry, and she just could not see a future in this. Those were the words. She could not see a future in this. He stopped. I told her I understood. He looked at his hands. I had been with her for 4 years. I was 3 weeks from marrying her, and I sat in that hospital bed and told her I understood, because I thought, I actually believed, that if I made it easy for her to leave, if I didn't make her feel terrible about it, then I would be the kind of man she might regret leaving, that she might come back. He laughed, a short, dry sound with no warmth in it. She didn't come back. Marcus was still. The engine idled. A car passed them on the road, its headlights sweeping the cab for a moment and then gone. She got married the following year, Richard said. I heard from a mutual friend. She has 3 children. She lives in Connecticut. He had not said any of this in 30 years, not to anyone, not out loud. He had taken it apart, piece by piece, in the private dark of too many nights to count, but he had not said it in a room with another person in it. And now that he had no idea what to do next. The board wants to close 2 facilities, he said. 430 people. They keep saying it like it's a correction to a formula, like the people are a rounding error. Marcus was quiet. I built this company, Richard said. I built it from the ground up, from one regional contract and a borrowed office. I built it through 11 years of 70-hour weeks, while everyone who saw me in that chair assumed I was a story and not a businessman. I made it real. And now, 3 men who have been on the board for 4 years want to empty 2 buildings full of people who have worked there longer than the 3 of them combined. He stopped. I'm sorry, he said. I don't know why I'm saying this to you. Marcus moved the gear shift forward. He pulled back into traffic. Because I'm here, Marcus said, and I'm not going to repeat it. He said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. They drove. The river road ran along the water for another 1.5 miles before it curved back toward the city, the lights growing closer and denser, the familiar architecture of Richard's neighborhood beginning to appear. Richard did not open his phone again. He sat and looked out the window and thought about a woman in Connecticut with 3 children and a life she had believed was not possible in a hospital room 30 years ago, and he thought about whether she was right. And then he thought about what he had built in the space where that life would have been, and whether it was enough, and whether enough was a thing that meant anything at all when a man came home to a quiet apartment that had been designed around a life rather than for one. When they pulled up to his building, Marcus got out as always, pulled the wheelchair, adjusted the rail. Richard got out of the car. He sat on the footpath for a moment before going in. Marcus, he said. Marcus looked at him. The specialist, for your daughter, Dr. Fletcher. He had remembered the name. He had remembered the name without writing it down, which meant it had lodged somewhere. Do you have documentation of the denials? Marcus looked at him carefully. Yes. All of them? Every letter. Richard nodded. Don't do anything with them yet, he said. Give me a few days. Marcus was still for a moment. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Then he said, Mr. Cole. A few days, Richard said. He went inside. In the elevator, he looked at his reflection in the steel doors. The man looking back at him was someone he did not fully recognize, not because anything had changed on the surface, but because something had moved behind the eyes, something that had been stationary for a very long time. He went to his apartment. He called his legal team at 7:45 in the evening, which was unusual enough that the attorney who answered, a man named Craig who had been on retainer for 6 years, paused before speaking. I need a specialist insurance dispute filed, Richard said. Pediatric neurology, full coverage argument, out-of-network override, and denial reversal. I'll send you the details. Craig said he could have a preliminary framework by Thursday. Wednesday, Richard said. He hung up. He sat in the apartment, in the dark this time, not turning on the lights, the city coming through the windows the way it always did, relentless and bright. He thought about the 430 people he was still fighting for. He thought about the board meeting in 2 weeks. He thought about 30 years of building something that was supposed to mean something, and whether meaning was something that could be built or whether it arrived, unasked for, in a car pulled over to the side of a road while the river ran dark past the railing. He was 61 years old. He could not see a future in this. That was what she had said, standing in the hospital room with her coat still on, the coat with the cream-colored buttons he could still see clearly when he chose to look at that memory, which he rarely did. He sat in the dark and looked at it. And for the first time in 30 years he thought, she was wrong. Marcus had stopped being surprised by hard news. That was not the same as being unbothered by it. Hard news still arrived, and did what it did. It landed in the chest and sat there, dense, demanding attention. But the surprise had worn off somewhere across the last 3 years of medical letters and rescheduled appointments and insurance forms that seemed to be written specifically to make a tired man feel confused at the end of a long day. He had reached a place where hard news simply arrived, and he nodded and said okay, and started thinking about the next thing to do. It was not strength exactly. It was more like a habit the body had developed, the way hands develop calluses, not because they stop feeling, but because they have to keep working anyway. So when the hospital billing department called him on a Thursday afternoon, while he was waiting in the warehouse parking lot before his afternoon shift, he answered the call already in that mode. He already had the pen out. He was already bracing to write down the next number. What the woman on the other end said was not a number he was expecting. She said that the outstanding balance on Lily's account, all of it, the specialist consultations, the treatment plan costs, the neurologist fees that the insurance company had been disputing, had been settled. Marcus said, "I'm sorry. Say that again." She said it again. He sat in the parking lot for a long moment. The warehouse was behind him, the sound of loading equipment running, the ordinary noise of his ordinary day. In his hand, the pen he had gotten out to write down a number he could not afford sat unused. He asked how. The billing coordinator was careful. She said she was not supposed to provide details of third-party payments, that the account had simply been cleared and there was nothing further owed. She wished him a good day. He sat with the phone in his hand after she ended the call. There was only one explanation that made any sense, and the explanation was so far outside of anything he had reason to expect that his mind kept moving past it and doubling back, unable to land. He drove to Richard's building that evening. He did not call ahead. He was not scheduled to drive Richard until the following morning. He drove there anyway, parked outside, and called the number Richard had given him 3 weeks ago for schedule coordination. It rang 3 times. "Webb," Richard said. He answered the phone with surnames when he was in work mode, Marcus had noticed. "Why?" Marcus said. A pause. "Where are you?" Richard asked. "Outside your building." Another pause, shorter this time. "Come up," Richard said. The lobby was marble and quiet, staffed by a single night desk attendant who had clearly been told to expect him because she smiled and gestured toward the elevator without asking his name. The elevator opened on the 14th floor, and the door at the end of the hallway was already open, and Richard was in the entrance in his chair. "Come in," Richard said. Marcus came in. The apartment was the kind of space that told a story in every detail, if you knew how to read it. It was large. It was ordered. The furniture was good but not showy. Everything placed with the logic of a man who knew exactly what he needed and had no particular interest in impressing anyone with it. There was a wall of books on the far side of the living room. A single plant, healthy, on the windowsill. No photographs that Marcus could see. Not one. He stood in the center of the living room. "It was you," Marcus said. Richard moved to the far side of the room, turned to face him. "Sit down," he said. "I don't need to sit down. I need to understand why." "I heard you tell your daughter the appointment was moved. I asked some questions. The insurance situation had a legal resolution that nobody had pursued because it required legal capacity that most people don't have access to." He stopped. "I have access to it." Marcus looked at him. "That is not all of it," he said. "The billing woman said the balance was settled. The legal costs would have cleared the appeal. The balance is something else." Richard was quiet. "How much?" Marcus said. "That's not. How much did you put in?" Richard looked at him steadily. "Enough," he said. "For the full treatment plan. For the next 2 years." Marcus stood very still. He had known it was coming. He had known, from the moment the billing woman said the words, that it was something significant. But hearing the shape of it, 2 years, full plan, everything Lily needed, the thing he had been fighting for across 3 years of letters and phone calls and night shifts and warehouse days, he had to look away. He looked at the window. The city was out there, lights and motion, indifferent and continuous. "I don't know how to owe a man like you," he said. His voice was steady, but the steadiness cost him. You don't owe me anything, Richard said. That is not how it works. A man does something like this, and there is an obligation. Webb. Richard's voice was firm, not unkind. You don't owe me anything. You already paid. Marcus turned back to look at him. 3 weeks ago, Richard said, you pulled the car over, and you told me you would not drive while I was like that. You have no idea what you were interrupting. What that car would have arrived back to if you had just driven. He stopped. I was in the habit of being fine. I had been in the habit of being fine for 30 years. It is a very effective habit. It makes you very productive. It also makes you— He paused and chose the word carefully. Narrow. He looked at his hands. My fiancée left 8 days after my accident, he said. I told her I understood. I had a hospital full of people telling me I was handling it well. I kept handling it well for 30 years, and somewhere in there, I stopped knowing who I was handling it for. Marcus sat down. Not because he needed to. Because the conversation had become something that required sitting. I do not do things like this, Richard said. I want you to understand that. I am not a man who does quiet things for people. I have been, for 30 years, a man who does effective things for the company, for shareholders, for a board that currently wants to remove 430 jobs. And I have done those things very well, and come home to this apartment, and not thought about much except what needed to be done next. That has been my life. He looked at Marcus directly. Your daughter called you, and said the appointment was moved, and you said okay, and you figured it out, and you drove me to the airport at 6 in the morning, in the rain, and you did not ask anything of anyone. You did not make it a story. You did not need me to know what your life was. He stopped. I needed to know. Marcus was quiet. I had a man say something to me once, Richard said. In the hospital. A stranger. He said, that is a hard road. I am sorry you are on it. I have thought about those words more times than I can count. I never did anything with them. I never said anything like it to anyone. He looked at the window. I am sorry it took me this long to figure out that there was something to do with them. Marcus looked at him. Really looked at him. In the way that people rarely look at each other when they are used to being in professional proximity. In the way that costs something. You are a strange man, Richard Cole, he said at last. Richard made a sound that was close to a laugh. Yes, he said. I have been told. Marcus stood up. I am going to take my daughter to see Dr. Fletcher on Friday, he said. And I am going to let that happen, and I am going to not try to figure out what comes after it, because I have spent 3 years only thinking about what comes after, and I am very tired of that. That sounds right, Richard said. Marcus moved toward the door. He stopped. She is going to want to meet you, he said. Lily. When I tell her, and I will tell her, I am not going to let her not know that this happened. She is going to want to meet you. She asks about the people I drive. She has been asking about you since the 2nd week. Richard looked at him. What has she asked? He said. Whether you are as serious in real life as you seem in the stories. Whether you ever smile. Whether you have been to Disney World. A pause. Tell her, Richard said slowly, that I smile occasionally, and that I have not been to Disney World. Marcus nodded. He opened the door. She will have thoughts about that, he said. He left. Richard sat in the apartment. The door had closed. The city was the same as it always was outside the windows. His hands were in his lap, and the plant was on the windowsill, and the books were on the wall, and the room was quiet, in the specific way that rooms are quiet when something significant has just happened in them, and the air has not finished settling. He thought about what Craig had said on the phone when the legal work was done, that the insurance company had not fought hard, that the case was solid, that cases like this were usually settled because fighting them cost more than covering them, and the insurers knew it. He thought about 430 people in 2 buildings in the southeast who did not know there was someone fighting for them in a boardroom. He thought about a child named Lily who asked whether he ever smiled. He got his phone. He opened the airline app. He looked at the screen for a moment. He typed, Disney World, Orlando. He did not book anything yet. He just looked at the dates. Then he closed the app and opened his work email and began drafting the response to the board that he had been composing in the back of his mind all week. The one that laid out, in clean and unambiguous terms, exactly why the two facilities were staying open, and exactly what it would cost the board to vote otherwise, and he wrote it with a precision and a clarity that surprised even him, because somewhere in the last hour something had come loose that had been stuck for a very long time, and the words were coming out cleaner now, sure of themselves. He wrote it in 40 minutes. He sent it at 8:10. He sat back. Outside the windows, the city was exactly as it had always been. Inside the apartment, something had changed that did not have a name yet, but was real. Lily Webb met Richard Cole on a Saturday morning in October, under a sky that had finally decided to be properly autumn, clear and cold, the light coming in at the angle that makes everything look like it is being seen for the first time. Marcus had told her the night before. He had sat at the kitchen table while she finished her dinner, and he had told her, carefully and simply, about the man in the car who had done a quiet and very large thing for their family. He told her without making it bigger than it was, and without making it smaller either. He told her the way he had learned to tell her things that were real, straight across, with room for her to feel whatever she was going to feel about it. She had been quiet for a moment. Then she had asked, why? Marcus had looked at her. Because he could, he said, and because he decided that meant he should. She had thought about this for a while. Is he going to be there tomorrow? She said. Yes. Okay, she said, and finished her dinner. She wore her red coat. She had strong opinions about her red coat. It was the kind of coat that required a matching level of occasion, and she had decided, without announcing it, that meeting Richard Cole was that kind of occasion. She also wore her hair in 2 plaits, which she did when she wanted to feel organized, and she brought a small notebook she kept for what she called important conversations, though she did not tell her father this until they were already in the car. You're taking notes? Marcus said. Not notes, she said, just in case I want to remember something. He looked at her in the rear view the same way he had once looked at her mother, in a flash of recognition so complete it was almost physical. He did not say anything. He drove. Richard was waiting at the front of the building. He had come out early, which was not something he usually did. He was a man who appeared precisely on time, and considered early to be an admission of something. But that morning he had come out early, and he was sitting in the weak sunlight at the edge of the accessible ramp, his hands in his lap, watching the street. The car pulled up. Lily got out before Marcus had fully stopped. She did it with the specific fearlessness of children who have decided they are ready for a thing, walking directly toward Richard with her red coat and her plaits and her notebook tucked under her arm, and she stopped in front of him and she said, "You're Richard." "I am," he said. "I'm Lily," she said. "You helped my dad." He looked at her. There was something in the directness of her that he had not been prepared for. Not the content of what she said, but the quality of her attention. She was looking at him the way very few adults looked at him, completely, without the slight sideways quality that crept into most people's manner when they were managing their reaction to something unfamiliar. She was just looking at him. "Your dad helped me too," he said. She considered this. How? "That," he said, "is a slightly long answer." "I have a notebook," she said. He almost smiled. He felt it at the corner of his mouth, the muscle pulling in that direction, surprising him. "So you do," he said. Marcus was there now, standing a few feet back, watching his daughter talk to a man he had driven through the dark for weeks and had not been able to see clearly until the night in the apartment, and he watched her with the particular feeling that parents develop across years of watching their children, a pride so large it sat just at the edge of pain. The 4 of them, Marcus, Lily, Richard, and the quiet between them that was beginning, gradually, to fill with something warmer, walked to the small cafe at the corner that Marcus had chosen because it had the right kind of accessible entrance, and the coffee was decent, and the tables were spaced so that a wheelchair did not make the whole room a logistical problem. They sat. Lily ordered hot chocolate with particular care, and then opened her notebook to a fresh page. "My dad said you built a company," she said to Richard. "I did," he said. "By yourself?" "Mostly." She wrote something. "Why?" He looked at her. "Because I needed something to do," he said. "That was larger than what happened to me." She looked up from the notebook. "What happened to you?" Marcus said. Gently. "Lily." "It is fine," Richard said. He looked at the girl. She was waiting with the patience of someone who genuinely wanted to know, not because she was curious in a shallow way, but because she had learned, somewhere in 9 years of her life, that things that happened to people mattered and deserved to be heard. "I had an accident," he said, "when I was 31. And after the accident I could not walk anymore, and the woman I was going to marry left, and I had a choice about what to do with the time that came after all of that." "And you built the company," she said. "Yes." She wrote again. "Was it enough?" she said. The cafe was warm. The light through the windows was the October kind, amber and direct. Marcus had stopped lifting his coffee cup. Richard looked at the table. "For a long time," he said. "I told myself it was." She looked at him. "And now?" He looked back at her. "Now," he said, "I think it was a beginning. And beginnings are enough, if you do something with them eventually." She wrote this down, slowly and carefully, the way she wrote things she wanted to keep. "I'm starting treatment on Monday," she said, without looking up from the notebook. "Dr. Fletcher says it's going to be slow. He said the word incremental 6 times in one appointment, which my dad says means, don't get your hopes too high, but also it means there is hope." "There is," Richard said. "He said that with the treatment plan, my progression could stabilize by next spring." She closed the notebook. I looked up stabilize. "It means it stops getting worse." "That is what it means," Richard said. She nodded. She picked up her hot chocolate. "My dad says you've never been to Disney World," she said. Richard glanced at Marcus. Marcus was looking at the ceiling with an expression of complete innocence. "I have not," Richard said. "We've never been either," she said. "I've always wanted to go." She said this plainly, without the particular sadness of a child who does not believe a thing is possible, but with the simple statement of a person who knows what they want and intends to want it until it happens. "Maybe we could all go sometime." Marcus looked at her. Richard looked at her. She looked back at them both, unconcerned, and drank her hot chocolate. In the weeks that followed, the board backed down. It did not happen in one meeting. It happened across 3 meetings, and 2 revised proposals, and one very long phone call between Richard's legal team and the board's own advisors, during which certain numbers were laid out in terms that made the streamlining argument much less attractive than it had appeared in the original presentation. The 2 facilities stayed open. 430 people did not receive letters. The 3rd quarter closed and the numbers were fine, as Richard had always known they would be. He did not say he told them so. He was not that kind of man. He did send an email to the full company on the day the decision was confirmed, thanking the teams in both locations for their patience and their work. He wrote it himself. He did not have Owen draft it. He wrote it at 6 in the morning before Marcus arrived, and it was 3 paragraphs, and it was direct, and it did not say anything about the board, or the fight, or what it had cost him, because the people in those buildings did not need to know the mechanics of how they had been protected. They just needed to know they had been. Marcus arrived at 6:15, and Richard was already downstairs. The morning was cold but dry. The city was doing its usual thing, waking up loud and purposeful. Marcus loaded the chair with the same care he always had, adjusted the seat rail, got behind the wheel. The jazz was low. They pulled into traffic. After a few minutes, Marcus said, "Lily asked me last night if you had booked the tickets yet." Richard said nothing for a moment. "She is very thorough," he said. "She made a list," Marcus said, "of the rides she wants to do. She has ranked them by likelihood that you would agree to go on them." Richard looked out the window. "And where do I fall on those rankings?" "There are 2 rides she thinks you'll actually say yes to. There are 4 she is going to try anyway." A pause. "She has already decided how she will ask you about the other 4? "She has practiced," Marcus said. 3 nights in a row. Richard was quiet. "When is she finished with the first month of treatment?" he said. "End of November." He nodded. He looked out at the city moving past. "Tell her," he said, "that I will look at the December dates." In the rear view, Marcus smiled. A real one, the kind that changed the whole shape of his face. She's going to be very organized about this, he said. There will be a spreadsheet. I deal with spreadsheets every day, Richard said. I can manage. They drove. The city kept doing what cities do, moving, and layering, and carrying all the separate lives within it forward at the same time, each one a thread in a fabric too large to see whole. Marcus drove. Richard sat with the morning. The music played its low and unhurried note. Richard Cole was 61 years old. He had spent 30 of those years inside the shape of what a bad afternoon had made of him. Efficient, managed, productive, distant, capable in every direction, except the one that required him to believe something might still be waiting for him, that he had not already decided was gone. He had not planned to change. He had not planned for the scheduling error, had not planned for the rain or the engine, or the man in the wet jacket who worked under a hood on a highway shoulder without flinching. He had not planned to ask a stranger questions that cost him something to ask, or to pull a file on an insurance case for a child he had never met, or to sit in a cafe on a Saturday morning while a 9-year-old with a notebook wrote down something he said and looked at it like it was worth keeping. He had not planned any of it. It had arrived the way the janitor's 2 sentences had arrived 30 years ago, without announcement, in the middle of an ordinary morning, in a form so simple that it could easily be missed. He had not missed it this time. The car moved through the city, steady and quiet. The morning opened around them. Lily Webb started her treatment on a Monday and reported to her father on the Monday after that Dr. Fletcher had said her first session had gone exactly as they hoped, and that the word he used this time was not incremental. The word he used was responsive. Marcus sat with that word in the car, on the way home from the clinic. He sat with it all the way through his afternoon shift. He sat with it at the kitchen table that night while Lily did her homework and hummed something to herself in the particular absent-minded way she hummed when she was concentrating. And he thought about the road that had led here, the years of it, the weight of it, all the mornings he had gotten up before the alarm and told himself it was getting handled. It was handled. Not by him alone, not in the way he had always assumed it would have to be. One man, alone, making it work through sheer accumulated effort. Someone had reached across. He thought about Richard Cole in an apartment with no photographs on the walls, driving across 30 years of a life built entirely around refusing to need anything that could be taken away. And he thought about what it must have cost that man to reach across. He thought about what it cost anyone. He thought about what it meant that a stranger could change the whole weight of a thing simply by deciding to care about it. His daughter looked up from her homework. "Dad." "Yeah." "Can we get a calendar for planning the trip?" He looked at her. She looked back at him, matter of fact, the red coat hanging on the chair behind her, the notebook on the table beside the homework. "Richard said he'd look at December," she said. "December has 31 days. We should plan." Marcus got up and found a pen. She was right. There was planning to do. And for the first time in 3 years, the planning was not about managing what was going wrong. It was about choosing what to do next. That was a different kind of planning entirely, the kind that sat lighter in the chest, the kind that a man could carry without it costing him sleep. He found a blank calendar page in the back of Lily's school planner, and he set it on the table between them, and she pulled her notebook open to a fresh page, and they began. Outside, the city carried on. The year was turning toward its end. In a quiet building across town, a man was looking at flights on his phone, with something he had not felt in 30 years sitting in him, patient and small and real. It did not have a name yet. It did not need one. It was enough, right now, just to be there.